Do you want your friends to play a tabletop RPG? Are you upset that your group only plays D&D and doesn't seem to want to play anything else? Do you want to slam your fist in the table and tell your group that tabletop role-playing games are an extremely diverse hobby that covers all kinds of genres and settings and systems, and that there may be other games out there that they would enjoy more than D&D? Have your friends played other things before but now settled down in a comfort zone that's difficult to break? Do they think you're annoying or whiny or a hater for suggesting to play other things? In this video I'm going to try to help you introduce a tabletop RPG to your group. It may not work because every group is different, but I'm going to try to cover as many approaches as possible and hopefully you'll get something out of it in the end. However, before we discuss ways to introduce a new game to your group, we should probably talk about what kind of reasons the group may have for not wanting to play the game you're pitching. It could be that the game you're pitching is assumed to not be a good fit for the players in your group. They may not like the genre or the system or the overall playstyle that game offers, and you may not be pitching the game in a way that appeals to them. It could be that you're trying to pitch a tabletop RPG to a group of players who haven't played RPGs before, and they could picture the hobby as being awkward and kind of geeky, which it is, and that's a common impression people have. While many get over those feelings in their first session, there are those who will simply never enjoy this hobby, and then trying to pitch it to them is pointless. It could be that your group assumes that getting into a new game will take too much work, or it could be that you're trying to pitch a new game without taking responsibility to GM it yourself. If you're unloading a bunch of work on another player for a system that they are not passionate about, you can expect resistance. It could be that your group has developed a comfort zone where they have met all of their expectations already in the game they are currently playing, and adding something new to that would disrupt that comfort. I find that this is often seen among those who exclusively play D&D and have never tried another game. When D&D has met your expectations so far and you don't have experience with other games, it can be difficult to imagine what another game could do else or different or better. Regardless of if your group is reluctant to or hyped for a new game, it can be an investment for a group to try something new, especially for the GM. Since I think that communication is the key to everything, I think the default thing to do should always be to discuss together with the group what game they are interested in playing before investing time and money in a new system. But if you have a game you're really hyped about and you want to convince your group to at least give it a try, then the first thing you need to do is to sell the idea of the game to them. Some games can be hard sells, and then it's important that you think about your pitch and focus on the things you want them to latch on to. My most played game is Exalted, and I've always been hyped to a fault about that game. It's a complex game with a core book that's not particularly efficiently designed, and it has so much player content that new players often get choice paralysis. The game's setting is huge as well, and because it's so diverse, there's so much in it that you can have lengthy discussions about. I've done the wrong way to pitch Exalted many times, and that's to overwhelm new players with information about the game and its setting. My mouth has just gone off and started talking about solars and lunars and primordials, and suddenly I get into sidereals because they are cool, and then I talk about the Yoses and Deathlords and the charms and the evocations and how cool it is to have control spells, and I can literally see my players shut down in front of my eyes. Sometimes they are nice enough to humor me because they see my excitement for the game, but they end up mostly confused and intimidated in the end. If you want to pitch a game that you're passionate about, you need to do so in as few words as possible. This is called an elevator pitch because it should be done before you reach the right floor and the doors open up. Focus on the one aspect of the game that you think will appeal to your players and let the other details sink into the background. Instead of talking about every aspect of Exalted at the same time, focus on the thing that the players need to know. This is a game where you get to play someone who is extremely powerful already from the start. You're Hercules, you're Achilles, you're chosen of the gods. This is a game where you can challenge the gods themselves already in your first session, and no matter where you go in the world, it will change in your wake. That's all you need to say as an elevator pitch. From here on out, players can go, "Oh, that sounds interesting," or they can go, I think I'm looking for something a little bit more grounded and relatable. Not every pitch works, of course, because people have different tastes, but the elevator's pitch is the best way to introduce a new idea to someone. Once they are hooked by the idea, you can start adding the extra details. Now, the elevator pitch's primary goal is to plant a seed of interest about the game within your group. There are more things you need to consider before a game can actually start, though. For one thing, who will GM the game? If you're only a player and never a GM, you cannot expect the GM to suddenly pick up and GM a new game for you just because you want them to. Being a GM is a big responsibility. While you can be GM without having a full grasp of a game's rules and setting, you need to at least have a working overview. To become GM requires reading, so if you want to introduce a new game to your group, you should expect to be the GM for that game. It could be that you have a nice enough GM to be willing to take on that role and responsibility, but you cannot assume it or expect it. You're the one pitching the game. Be willing to go that extra kilometer and do the preparations needed to run it. Once you've ran it for your group, it's possible that someone else will want to GM it for you later because they might like it. Once you've pitched the game and taken on the GM role, the next step should be to make your group more comfortable around the game and its system. This does not apply to everyone, but it's my personal experience that people tend to like the setting before the system. I'm not sure how this applies to D&D players because D&D is very system driven and many, not all, D&D settings are bland and uninspiring, at least to me. But I find that pitching a game is usually related to that game's setting and not to its mechanics. For example, if I want to invite someone to a game of vampire, I sell them on the idea of vampire intrigue, not on the way hunger dice work. However, should we have 3 or 4 different vampire games to choose from, then maybe the mechanics can play a larger role in that decision. There are exceptions to this, of course. For example, setting agnostic games such as Fate Core can be an appealing choice just because they lack a setting, but I still think that it's whatever story the GM wants to tell that's the main selling point. Let's play Fate so that we can tell this story. The way to help your group become comfortable with the game you've decided on is to expand the pitch with the information needed to understand the absolute basics of what the game is about. You could either sit down and describe some vital parts of the setting that's directly related to the story you're about to tell. Don't tell them the entire history of the world or the intricate details of the land's political structure. Tell them just enough so that they can get a picture of what kind of environment they'll play in and what their characters' roles will be in that environment. Do the same for rules. Give them just enough of the mechanics to comfortably generate characters and be able to perform general action resolutions. Make a cheat sheet or let the player sit with a GM screen instead of you. Don't even bother explaining rules that won't be immediately used. For example, while explaining the hunger dice is important for your vampire game, don't even bother mentioning how Memoriam works. Another good way to get more comfortable is to explain the new game in ways that relate to other games they're familiar with. For example, a D&D group that decides to try playing Exalted may feel more comfortable referring to the solar casts based on their archetypes, the Dawns are the fighters, the Senates are the clerics, the Twilights are the wizards, the Knights are the rogues, and the Eclipses are the bards. Now, those of you who know Exalted know that this is an oversimplification of the roles, but oversimplification is what we're looking for. The D&D groups know what to expect from a fighter or a rogue. This at least gives them the concepts they need to start building a framework for what the new game will then gradually reveal through their experiences with it. The key to introducing a new tabletop RPG to a group is to get started as quickly as possible. A group of pre-generated characters can work for one shot, but players often tend to want a personal touch on their characters. This is more important if the character is going to stick around for a while. If I know that I'll be GMing a briefer story, I've found that an effective way to both get started quickly and let the players feel like their characters are their own is to combine pre-generated characters with customization. For example, present a number of roles with finished stats, but without attached personalities. Then let the players modify the character to feel more like something they've created themselves. If the plan is to play a longer campaign, it can be valuable to let the players create the characters from scratch. Don't ask for too much backstory or extra work though. You can easily start the game with only some basic motivations and then build backstory as you play. Since players should experience the game from the game and not from reading about the game before the game, it's perfectly reasonable to have simple concepts become more complex through the narrative of the game. By starting out simple, you also give your players more freedom to make changes without it having a negative impact on the narrative. When you're not comfortable with a system and you're making a character for that system, you're very likely to make decisions that you otherwise wouldn't do. Give your players the freedom to make changes to their character once they recognize that certain aspects of the game didn't quite work out the way they thought it would. The best way to start a new game is to show players what's exciting about that game. Don't let things drag for too long. Start in the middle of the action. Let them immediately do some action resolution without making things too complicated. You can only learn so much from reading or talking about game mechanics. You need to actually use them, but don't overdo them. If you take Exalted as an example, since the game mechanics are uninviting for new players, I need to make sure to gradually teach the system to new players over the course of multiple sessions, especially when it comes to combat and initiative interaction. The best type of game to introduce to a new group is a rules light system, but that may not be the type of game you want to play. You may want to play a rules heavy system like Exalted because you like aspects of the game or its setting that you think are more important than the game's challenges or flaws. Exalted is that for me because there's never been a game that I'm more passionate about, but there are so many problems with its system presentation that it's impossible to argue with people's criticism about it. I think Exalted 3rd Edition is the best game in the world, but I also think it's a poorly designed game, and this can be a contradiction without it being cognitive dissonance. I love the game because I've overcome the main obstacles that keep newcomers out. I can now help new players to traverse those obstacles in a more streamlined fashion. And the way to do this is to GM the game in a way that introduces mechanic after mechanic in a way that's simple to grasp and narratively important. However, while I think it's important to keep things simple, I also think it's important to show a little bit of everything that the game has to offer. If you focus on only a single basic thing, the players can easily associate the game with that thing. A better way to retain the players' interests in the game is to focus on that single basic thing to get them started, but to show them what more the game can offer. The adventure Hoard of the Dragon Queen for D&D 5th edition is known as a fairly poor adventure module, but it did one thing right. It let the players go up against an adult blue dragon already at level 1. The purpose was not to have them win against this dragon. The purpose was to show the players that you're here now, rescuing farmers and fighting kobolds. This dragon is where you'll go. That's the enemy you'll fight soon. The same could be done with other games as well. Present the challenges where the players are in control, but reveal something larger to them in order to build anticipation of what the game can offer. Hopefully, they'll want to come back for more. If you like this video and want to see more, make sure to like, comment, share and subscribe. If you're interested in any of my other projects, make sure to visit my Patreon. For only $1 a month you can get access to previews of my game Machineborn, which is getting closer and closer to completion. I hope you got something out of this video, and don't be upset if your pitch fell on deaf ears. It's perfectly possible that you do everything right, but it's just the wrong game for your group to play with. In that case, you could look for new players as well that are more willing to try the same game as you. There are games for everyone, but there are also players for all games. Until next time, be kind to each other and play some games.